Welcome to this week's edition of Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up, your trusted source for insights and analysis from the world of espionage, foreign interference, sabotage, and national security. Neil Bisson, a retired Canadian Security Intelligence Service intelligence officer, and the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. Neil draws on over 25 years of frontline experience in intelligence and law enforcement to bring you the critical stories shaping our global security environment. This week, a scathing report reveals that a CSIS overseas operation was abruptly halted without proper authority, placing Canadian officers at risk and exposing serious gaps in ministerial accountability. Another Syria investigation links a CSIS human source to ISIS, raising uncomfortable questions about risk assessment and how far intelligence agencies can, or should, go when penetrating terrorist networks. In the U.S., 2 Chinese nationals are charged with smuggling a toxic crop pathogen into Michigan, triggering fears about biosecurity, foreign research infiltration, and China's growing use of scientific cover. We also cover the Colorado terror attack targeting Jewish civilians, the controversial appointment of a 22-year-old political aide to lead a U.S. counterterrorism office, and a sweeping Canadian border bill that could fundamentally reshape intelligence, immigration, and surveillance powers. All of this and much more. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Neil Bisson, a retired intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. Each week, I scour open media news to bring you the world of intelligence, provide insights, analysis, and intelligence to help you make sense of the complex threat landscape that shapes national security and intelligence collection issues. We've seen some major announcements and criticisms affecting intelligence collection in Canada this week, as well as MI5 still facing allegations of lying in court and more anti-Semitic terrorist attacks in the US. There's a lot to cover, so let's dive in. In our first story, we examine a troubling issue that goes to the very heart of operational accountability and political oversight in Canada's intelligence community. The CBC report on a newly released, heavily redacted review of the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, or Syria, which reveals that a sensitive CSIS operation conducted overseas was abruptly suspended by government officials, placing Canadian intelligence officers in harm's way. The halt was ordered without proper documentation or authority, raising major red flags about how we manage high-risk operations abroad. The Syria's findings paint a disturbing picture. The CSIS operation, still classified, was suspended mid-mission without any formal directive from either the CSIS director or the public safety minister. This abrupt halt reportedly created unnecessary danger for Canadian intelligence officers on the ground and inflicted reputational damage on Canada. From an intelligence perspective, this isn't just a bureaucratic misstep, it's an operational hazard. Field operations require certainty, clear command chains, and airtight communication. When political actors intervene without coordination, they not only risk operational failure, they risk lives. The broader implication? If Canada's intelligence community cannot rely on clear ministerial oversight and operational autonomy, future missions, particularly in hostile environments, may falter or even collapse under the weight of political indecision. To put this in context, all foreign-based intelligence operations have a different set of risk factors and potentially more significant fallout from a political, reputational, and governmental perspective. Additionally, although CSIS can and does conduct operations abroad, it is not a dedicated foreign human intelligence agency like the CIA or MI6. This isn't the first time that political interference or bureaucratic hesitation has hampered intelligence efforts. During the 2010s, CSIS was repeatedly flagged for operational opacity and a lack of clear ministerial directives. But this case goes a step further, suggesting a vacuum of leadership during a live overseas operation. In 2022, then Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino called for a review of how his office and CSIS coordinate accountability. That review has now yielded these damning conclusions. While the report is light on specifics, it does quote an urgent message from the then CSIS director David Vigneault. Time is quickly running out and the situation is getting much more tense on the ground. We need a decision tomorrow. That statement, likely issued from some frustration over the urgency and lack of response, underscores the operational volatility and the need for decisive leadership within ministries that must deal with intelligence matters. From my own experience, the absence of clear chain of command decisions in covert environments can be catastrophic. Officers in the field need to know that someone has their back, not just strategically, but politically. And Syria's recommendation that any non-CSIS directive halting an operation be formally documented and attributed to the Public Safety Minister is long overdue. This story should alarm every Canadian who believes in the need for effective, professional intelligence operations. CSIS officers working abroad were exposed to the dangers that are conducive with any foreign intelligence operation. That chain of command broke down. And the system of ministerial accountability, which is supposed to protect both our national security and democratic principles, failed. Going forward, the Government of Canada must take NSIRA's recommendations seriously. Canada's international credibility and the safety of our intelligence officers depends on it. Sticking with this issue, our next story brings us into some deeply uncomfortable territory, one that questions the very framework of how Canada handles high-risk human source operations abroad. The report by NSIRA uncovered major failures in ministerial accountability surrounding a secret CSIS operation, one linked to a controversial human source accused of smuggling 3 teenage British girls into ISIS-controlled Syria. The report, as previously mentioned, is highly redacted, but what has been made public paints a picture that, to the uninitiated, demonstrates incomplete briefings, overlooked legal risk, and a human source who likely worked for ISIS. But as you will see in my analysis, this isn't the whole story. According to NSIRA's findings, CSIS failed to adequately inform then Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino and even Prime Minister Trudeau about a covert overseas operation tied to Mohammed al-Rashid, a Syrian-born man who allegedly smuggled 3 teenage girls into Syria in 2015. Al-Rashid, according to the book The Secret History of the Five Eyes, was a CSIS source reportedly working with ISIS. According to the news article, CSIS categorized the operation as low risk and failed to flag his alleged criminal past or operational concerns to senior officials. Worse, it was only when al-Rashid was arrested and the case risked going public that CSIS disclosed Canada's involvement, suggesting the move was more about damage control than transparency. From an intelligence perspective, I can tell you, this is a gross underestimation of the work that goes into both assessing risk and the need to maintain as high a level of confidentiality as possible concerning the source. As with any criminal organization, and ISIS is a criminal organization by the very fact that they are a terrorist organization, the need to acquire access to them occurs through individuals who have access to the group. Police organizations don't gain access to gangs and mobs by speaking to and recruiting individuals who aren't a part of these groups. The same holds true in the world of counterterrorism. Risk management is a critical component of every operation that CSIS conducts, and this includes not only the risk to the source and the handlers, but the operation, the organization's reputation, and the political and governmental fallout as well. The idea that an operation is low risk is dependent on various factors, including what can be used to mitigate the risk at the time and going forward. If there is a robust gambit of mitigating factors, even an operation that appears to be high risk on the surface can be low risk once all the contributing factors are considered. Let's go back to 2015. The disappearance of Shamina Begum, Amira Abbas, and Khadiza Sultana, 3 British schoolgirls, made headlines across the UK. They had boarded a flight to Turkey before crossing into Syria. Later reporting, including BBC's interviews and Kirbaj's book, suggests al-Rashid facilitated the crossing during the time he was a human source for CSIS. The Canadian public only became aware of this connection in 2022 as a result of international investigative journalism. That prompted Trudeau to promise an inquiry and led to Mendicino requesting NSIRA's review. While no direct quotes from the intelligence community are cited in this report, Ashley Burke's CBC reporting included some critical insights. National Security Intelligence Advisor Jody Thomas stated that she had asked questions on behalf of multiple departments because of CSIS withholding information. The idea that CSIS was withholding information from the NSIRA is a misnomer. As in any ongoing intelligence operation, the safety of the operation, including the source and the intelligence team handling and supporting the operation, is paramount. Information is provided on a need-to-know basis, and the fact that more questions were being asked does not, in and of itself, indicate an attempt to prevent information from being shared. It's just the correct operational procedure for maintaining operational integrity and safety. This story is a powerful reminder of the complexity surrounding intelligence operations, especially when they occur outside your own country. The service is, and has been quite capable of operating complex foreign-based intelligence operations. The
The Syria report offers 6 key recommendations to overhaul how the government assesses risk and keeps ministers in the loop. As with any process, there is always room for improvement. However, trying to lay the blame at the foot of the service is not only irresponsible, but it's also dangerous. A national security culture needs to start from within the government, and this means that identifying, contacting, recruiting, and handling members of terrorist organizations, even outside Canada, is part of that world. Canadian politicians and review bodies cannot simply play the blame game when years after the operation occurred, investigative journalism pulls on the threads that demonstrate the activities of these individuals and operations. We head to the United States for our next story, where we take a closer look at a case that sits at the intersection of science, security, and sovereignty. 2 Chinese nationals, Yongqin Jian and Sun Yong Liu, have been charged with attempting to smuggle a biological plant pathogen into the United States. While experts downplay the likelihood that this was an act of agro-terrorism, the case still raises serious questions about scientific oversight, biological risk management, and foreign influence in academic institutions. Let's unpack what we know and why it matters to Canada and the broader Western intelligence community. According to federal prosecutors, Jian and Liu brought Fusarium graminearum, a toxic fungal pathogen, into the U.S. through the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. Jian had reportedly received Chinese government funding for her research on the fungus and planned to deliver it to a lab at the University of Michigan. The DOJ emphasized that this type of pathogen is considered a potential agro-terrorism agent due to its ability to damage critical food crops like wheat and barley, although it is not currently on the USDA's list of most dangerous agricultural threats. Jian and Liu are now facing multiple charges, including conspiracy, smuggling goods into the U.S., visa fraud, and making false statements. Perhaps most telling, Jian's electronics reportedly contained data referencing her membership and loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. From an intelligence perspective, this incident raises key red flags. The use of scientific collaboration as a vector for covert collection, influence, and even sabotage is a growing concern, and one that I have referenced on multiple occasions on this podcast. We've seen this pattern before. Foreign researchers working in sensitive academic labs without proper permits or oversight, often backed by state funding or ideological loyalties. This pathogen is not new. It is well known and present in dozens of U.S. states and has been in North America for more than a century. It causes a disease known as head blight, which has been responsible for billions of dollars in crop losses globally. So what's the concern? Because the smuggled samples could be foreign strains and are more aggressive, more toxic, or resistant to current mitigation tools. As one expert noted, it's not the presence of the fungus that's alarming, it's the unknown characteristics of the strain that was brought in. And then there's the issue of protocol. Any importation of foreign biological agents must be cleared through the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, with lab inspections and documentation. It's unclear whether Jian and Liu followed any of these steps. This echoes other known Chinese state efforts to collect genetic, agricultural, or biological data through unreported or covert means, whether through academic collaboration, cyber espionage, or theft of research material. The blending of civilian and state activity, particularly in biotechnology, is a growing tool in China's foreign influence playbook. Plant pathogens experts like Caitlin Allen and Gary Bergstone were quick to note that Fusarium graminearum isn't a top-tier threat, but that doesn't mean it's benign. Allen suggests the incident may be more of a case of bad judgment than malice, noting that passionate young researchers sometimes ignore procedure. Still, the DOJ sees it differently. Prosecutors highlighted the fungus's economic impact, noting that it produces a potent mycotoxin, sometimes called vomitoxin, that can harm both livestock and humans. The risk lies not just in the fungus, but in what it represents: a lapse in border biosecurity, the potential for foreign state-sponsored scientific misuse, and the legal gray zone where dual-use research can be manipulated for state purposes. As someone who's worked on border security integrity and national security issues, I can tell you this: even low-risk bioagents deserve scrutiny when the vector is covert and the sponsor is a geopolitical rival like the CCP. Recent added strains to the relationship between Washington and Beijing make this a potential attack on North American food supplies and the ability to produce crops for economic trade. This may not necessarily be an act of agro-terrorism, but it is a warning shot. Biological threats don't always come in the form of pandemics or weaponized viruses. Sometimes they come through a customs line,
inside a suitcase carried by someone with a research visa. In an area where food scrutiny and supply chain stability are becoming increasingly politicized and targeted, Canada and its allies must revisit how they vet foreign research collaborations, protect academic institutions, and enforce biological import protocols. For our next story, we turn to a disturbing case from Boulder, Colorado, where a man armed with Molotov cocktails and a makeshift flamethrower attacked a peaceful group rallying in support of Israeli hostages. 12 people were injured, including an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor, and the FBI is now treating the incident as an act of terrorism. We'll break down the facts, the ideological motivations, and what this attack says about the growing domestic landscape in North America, particularly when it comes to ideologically motivated violent extremism, or IMVE. The suspect has been identified as 45-year-old Mohammed Sabri Solomon, an Egyptian national who overstayed his U.S. visa and was living in the Colorado Springs area. According to court documents, Solomon planned the attack for over a year, studying how to build incendiary devices online and waiting until after his daughter's high school graduation to act. He targeted a group affiliated with Run for Their Lives, an organization advocating for the release of Israeli hostages held in Gaza. During the attack, Solomon allegedly shouted, "Free Palestine," and declared he wanted to kill all Zionist people. When arrested, he confessed to plotting multiple attacks and expressed regret only because he became frightened during the attack. This isn't a case of spontaneous violence. It was calculated, ideologically driven, and executed with intent. And while authorities say he acted alone, the extremist rhetoric and ideology he espoused reflects a broader radicalization trend happening both online and offline. From a national security perspective, this is a textbook example of IMVE, an individual radicalized by a specific worldview, in this case, anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic, who moves from grievance to intent to action. Solomon arrived in the U.S. in 2022 on a temporary visa that expired in early 2023. He later filed for asylum and was issued a work permit. U.S. officials now say that he was in the country illegally at the time of the attack. This case comes just days after another high-profile incident, a deadly shooting outside a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C., where the attacker also shouted, "Free Palestine." The backdrop here is a documented surge in anti-Semitic incidents across the US and Canada. According to the Anti-Defamation League, 2023 and 2024 saw record-breaking numbers of anti-Semitic threats and violence. Groups like Run for Their Lives, while explicitly peaceful, have become lightning rods for extremist ire, particularly in the wake of the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. The weaponization of slogans like "Free Palestine" by extremists is especially troubling because it hijacks legitimate protest language and distorts it into justification for violence. Special Agent Mark McCulloch, head of the FBI's Denver office, confirmed the FBI is investigating the attack as terrorism, emphasizing the targeted nature of the act. Court documents also indicate that Solomon left messages for his family in anticipation of his arrest or death, a potential indicator of martyrdom ideology often associated with extremist actors. From an intelligence perspective, there are several red flags here. Solomon conducted surveillance by researching his target group online. He prepared dozens of incendiary devices in advance. He deliberately timed his attack and left ideological statements behind. This closely mirrors tradecraft used by lone actor terrorism, where the attacker avoids detection by operating independently while being ideologically connected to a broader movement. It's also a case study in the challenges of monitoring radicalization among individuals with no formal ties to terrorist organizations. The attack in Boulder is a chilling reminder that North America is not immune to ideologically motivated terrorism, even when it's not directed by foreign actors. It also underscores how easily anti-Semitism can evolve from rhetoric to violence, especially when fueled by personal grievance, international conflict, and access to radicalizing material online. For intelligence and law enforcement communities, the incident raises urgent questions about visa overstay monitoring, radicalization detection among asylum applicants, and the rise in low-tech attacks using everyday items as weapons. This wasn't just a hate crime, it was a premeditated act of political violence, one that severely injured a Holocaust survivor and shattered a community. Back to Canada for our next story, where we examine a massive legislative proposal just tabled by the federal Liberal government. Bill C2, a sweeping 139-page border security bill that may significantly reshape how Canada manages its national security, immigration, data privacy, and intelligence operations. Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasanagari says the bill is focused on securing the border, fighting organized crime and fentanyl trafficking, and cracking down on money laundering.
but critics say it goes far beyond border management and introduces expansive new surveillance and enforcement powers that raise tough questions about oversight and civil liberties. So, what does this bill actually do? And how will it affect Canada's intelligence and security landscape? Bill C2 proposes a range of sweeping measures across several domains. Border security. It tightens asylum claim eligibility, expands the CBSA's powers to inspect containers leaving Canada, and closes loopholes in the Safe Third Country Agreement with the U.S. Surveillance and intelligence. It grants law enforcement and intelligence agencies, including CSIS, new authority to intercept communications and access digital data, even without court warrants in certain cases, and allows mail to be searched as part of criminal investigations. Asylum reform. The bill retroactively deems ineligible any asylum claim made over 365 days after a claimant's arrival in Canada, affecting thousands, including international students. It also allows Ottawa to halt or cancel immigration applications en masse for reasons of national security or public health. Coast Guard expansion. The Canadian Coast Guard is granted a new security role, including patrols near borders and in the Arctic, and permission to share surveillance data with military and intelligence partners. Financial crime enforcement. Civil and criminal penalties for failing to comply with anti-money laundering and terrorist financing laws are increased. The bill also imposes new requirements on digital service providers to organize user data for law enforcement access. This isn't just a border security bill. It's a multi-pronged legislative overhaul that touches immigration, cybersecurity, surveillance, organized crime, and maritime security. Canada has long faced criticism for lagging behind allies when it comes to border security and intelligence integration, particularly from American officials, including former and current U.S. administrations. Public Safety Minister Anadasan Nagri admitted that some provisions address long-standing American concerns about the northern border, but stressed the bill isn't a direct response to Donald Trump's security demands. The Coast Guard provisions, for instance, represent a significant evolution. Until now, the Canadian Coast Guard has been a civilian agency focused on navigation, search and rescue, and environmental protection. Bill C2 would give it a hybrid security mandate, potentially allowing for armed patrols in future, though Ottawa hasn't confirmed whether ships will be militarized. On the surveillance front, the bill emerges in the shadow of multiple court decisions that have hampered the ability of Canadian law enforcement to obtain digital evidence. Bill C2 appears to be the government's response, lowering the barriers for warrant access and expanding the intelligence community's ability to proactively gather data. National security expert Wesley Work notes that while the legislation is pitched as a border security bill, it has far broader implications. In his words, it's pitched as another set of measures to strengthen border security, but that is not a universal component of many of the proposed changes. Example, those that combat illicit financing and transnational organized crime. From a tradecraft standpoint, the data sharing clauses and warrantless access provisions could be a game changer for CSIS and other intelligence partners, enabling faster coordination and real-time intelligence flow across departments. Bill C2 is bold, complex, and to some, controversial. It could very well become the most significant overhaul to Canada's border, intelligence, and immigration systems in a generation. As this bill works its way through Parliament, expect some debate over the line between public safety and personal liberty, between national security and government overreach. For intelligence professionals, policymakers, and private sector security leaders, this is one to watch closely, because how Canada chooses to manage its borders, its data, and its people in the coming years will define the future of our national security posture. For our next story, we head to Washington for a controversy that's sparking deep concern in the intelligence and counterterrorism communities. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has placed a 22-year-old recent college graduate with no prior experience in security, intelligence, or public leadership in charge of a key federal terrorism prevention program. Thomas Bolgate, a self-described Trumplican and former Heritage Foundation intern, is now leading the Center for Prevention, Programs, and Partnerships, or CP3, a Department of Homeland Security initiative responsible for combating hate-motivated violence, terrorism, and school shootings. And if you think this sounds like a political patronage overriding national security, you're not the only one. Bolgate's appointment follows the abrupt resignation of CP3's previous head, Army veteran Bill Braniff, a seasoned national security expert who spent more than 20 years advancing evidence-based, community-led counter-extremism programs. Since its founding, CP3 has distributed tens of millions in federal grants to help prevent radicalization and violence, especially at the grassroots level. Braniff's approach emphasized destigmatization, data, and inclusion, a hard-won evolution away from the post-9/11 era focused on Sunni Islamic terrorism. Enter Folgate, a 22-year-old University of San Antonio graduate, former campaign volunteer for Donald Trump and a part-time gardener in 2020, according to his own LinkedIn profile. Before this appointment, he had worked as a special assistant in an immigration office at Department of Homeland Security, with no leadership experience in national security. Yet, DHS insists that he was given the CP3 post due to his success. To put this plainly, it's a stunning case of ideological placement over professional qualification. And it comes at a time when violent extremism is escalating, from the Molotov cocktail attack in Boulder to bombings and shootings tied to ideological hate. The CP3 program was created to fulfill one of the Department of Homeland Security's original mandates, preventing domestic terrorism. It supports law enforcement, community leaders, and non-government organizations in identifying and mitigating early signs of radicalization before violence erupts. But CP3's evolution under Banif was crucial. He helped to push the U.S. approach beyond outdated post-9/11 methods, which often alienated Muslim communities, and into more inclusive, fact-based models that could tackle white supremacists, anti-government extremists, and hate-based violence across the spectrum. Now, that program may be at risk. ProPublica reports that staff under Folgate described meetings with him as more like career counseling than policy leadership, and note that he lacks fundamental understanding of the agency's mission. All of this is happening while the U.S. sees a surge in ideologically motivated violent extremism. That includes the recent attack in Boulder by Mohammed Sabri Suleiman, previously described, and other incidents involving anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, and anti-government attacks. This isn't just a personal issue, it's a threat to the effectiveness of an already strained prevention ecosystem. Former officials who worked with CP3 described the appointment as an insult. One DHS veteran told ProPublica, "We are entering very dangerous territory." They warned that Folgate's sudden promotion signals a return to politicized, unqualified leadership at the top of critical national security functions. Even those in the intelligence community who might not align politically are concerned about the loss of institutional knowledge and credibility. Programs like CP3 rely on public trust and cooperation, something hard to sustain when the leadership is seen as unqualified or ideologically motivated. From my perspective, based on years of intelligence and enforcement, appointments like this severely undermine morale, weaken operational readiness, and erode trust, not just internally, but among community partners essential to successful prevention. This story may seem like political theater on the surface, but it cuts to the core of what makes a national security system effective: trust, credibility, and competence. The appointment of a politically connected 22-year-old intern to lead a terrorism prevention office is more than eyebrow-raising, it's dangerous. We've seen the cost of inexperience and ideology in intelligence leadership before. If the U.S. is serious about preventing terrorism, whether from lone actors, hate groups, or radicalized individuals, then CP3 and its leadership must be qualified, accountable, and grounded in professional best practice. Canada and its allies should take note. Weakening prevention models in the U.S. can have ripple effects across the Five Eyes, and it reinforces the urgent need for apolitical, expert-led intelligence programs. For our last story this week, I'm going to discuss a topic that has attracted a lot of attention in previous episodes of Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. It takes us to the heart of the British security establishment, where the United Kingdom's domestic intelligence agency, MI5, is facing unprecedented allegations, not from a foreign adversary, but from the BBC and its own judicial system. A High Court panel is now reviewing whether MI5 and 3 of its officers committed contempt of court by knowingly giving false information in an attempt to cover up the identity of a neo-Nazi informant who allegedly abused women. This case raises fundamental questions about accountability, ethics, and the relationship between intelligence agencies and the courts. At the center of the storm is a man known as Agent X, an MI5 source who reportedly used his protected status as government informant to intimidate, control, and abuse a woman referred to publicly as Beth. MI5 originally argued that it had never confirmed X's status and invoked the long-standing NCND, or neither confirm nor deny doctrine. However, the BBC was able to produce recordings and notes proving that an MI5 officer did, in fact, confirm X's role during an off-the-record call, seemingly in an effort to dissuade the journalist from pursuing the story. The High Court is now weighing whether this amounts to a deliberate deception. MI5's official barrister, Sir James Eddy KC, has issued an unreserved apology, but maintains that while serious errors occurred, they were not intentional lies. The BBC and Best's legal team disagree. They allege copious levels of dishonesty, a failure to acknowledge misconduct, and a lack of candor in MI5's internal investigations. They've called for contempt of court proceedings, a rare and serious escalation that could carry prison time or significant fines. The origins of this case go back to 2022, when the BBC attempted to publish an investigation into X, a violent neo-Nazi and misogynist. MI5 sought to block the story using secrecy provisions and legal arguments grounded in national security. Eventually, the BBC prevailed, but the fallout revealed a troubling pattern. MI5 gave false testimony in at least 3 court cases, all while claiming it had never breached its secrecy protocol. Compounding matters, much of the evidence has been confined to closed hearings, which neither Beth nor the BBC could attend. That secrecy has only deepened concerns about transparency and oversight. Beth's legal team now argues that this ruling could finally give her the fair trial she's been fighting for. Her solicitor, Kate Ellis, said the outcome really undermines MI5's credibility in the courts. The implications are massive. This is one of the most significant credibility cases MI5 has faced in decades, one that touches on source management, gender-based abuse, and institutional integrity. The BBC's barrister, Jude Bunting, KC, told the court that MI5's explanations lack candor and that the internal review, led by former government legal chief Sir Jonathan Jones, KC, failed to even speak with critical witnesses. Best counsel, Charlotte Kilroy, argued that MI5's insistence that the false evidence wasn't deliberate simply isn't credible given the weight of the documentation and recordings. Sir James Eddy, in defense of MI5, countered that the mistakes were serious but not intentional, and added that MI5 Director General Ken McCallum alerted the Home Security as soon as the situation came to light, but the damage may already be done. From an agency that depends on judicial trust, political oversight, and public legitimacy, even the appearance of dishonesty can be corrosive. From my own personal experience, intelligence agencies walk a fine line, balancing secrecy and accountability. But if that line is crossed, especially in a court of law, the entire foundation of democratic intelligence work can be shaken. Courts must be able to trust the agencies appearing before them. Full stop. The case is about more than one agent or one policy failure. It's about whether intelligence agencies are above the justice system or accountable to it. If MI5 knowingly gave false evidence to shield an agent accused of domestic abuse, then they are witnessing not just an operational failure, but a moral failure. Whether the High Court proceeds with contempt charges or not, one thing is clear. MI5's credibility has taken a significant hit, and future operations may suffer as a result. This case also raises broader questions for all Western intelligence agencies. How do we balance secrecy with justice? How do we ensure sources aren't abusing their power? How do we build trust when it's broken? Well, that puts a wrap on another week of intelligence. As always, links to the open source media stories are in the transcript. I'd like to inform my audience of a truly special opportunity. The Professional Development Institute at the University of Ottawa will be hosting a panel discussion featuring former RCMP and CSIS intelligence professionals at the Alice Trebek Alumni Hall in Ottawa on June 11th from 1 until 2:45 p.m. The list of distinguished speakers from the Pillar Society includes 2 individuals that I've previously had the opportunity to interview on my podcast, Intelligence Conversations. They include Dan Stanton, a former CSIS intelligence officer and executive, and Ivana Mooney, a former CSIS analyst. Registration starts at 12:45, and there should be plenty of time for questions and networking. If you're a national security practitioner, enthusiast, or academic, you won't want to miss this opportunity. And who knows, maybe you'll see me there. I'll leave a link to the presentation in the show notes. So until next week, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
That will do it for this week's Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. From a halted CSIS operation that endangered officers abroad, to allegations of MI5 misleading the courts, to the troubling rise of lone actor terrorism in North America, this week's stories are the critical importance of trust, oversight, and strategy in the intelligence world. Bringing you this level of detail and expert insight each week takes time, effort, and more than 2 decades of frontline experience, all dedicated to cutting through noise and delivering what matters. If this episode gave you something to think about, please share it with someone in your network, leave a review, or hit subscribe so you never miss a briefing. You can also support the podcast directly on Buzzsprout or through Patreon. Every contribution helps keep this work independent and focused. For more intelligence-driven content, including training, analysis, and resources, visit the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. And remember, as Neil always says, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe. See you next week.